Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy and I am the host of the show. People are living longer thanks to good health care and healthier lifestyles. But as we age, not everyone remains as sharp as they were years ago. And frequently a loved one, a son or a daughter, is called upon to help an elderly parent make ongoing lifestyle and medical decisions. This help could be informal or it could be through the use of some key legal documents executed before incapacity occurs. Often, however, no legal documents were executed, so children have to ask the court for authority to help their incapacitated parent. In a prior show, we dug more deeply into the decisions those children face in caring for an aging parent, from where they should live, meeting their personal care and medical needs, giving them a social life other than TV, and much more. Years ago, an elderly parent would move in with a child and her family, and those decisions were addressed by the family. But in recent years, that has changed, and that care is now often managed from across the country, from an adjacent state, or while the parent resides in a local nursing home or assisted living community. But as more and more seniors strive to age in place of their homes, families and guardians are hiring caregivers to help them with that daily care of a living loved one. And with the need for caregivers outpacing the caregivers available, this has become a difficult undertaking in two ways. Finding a caregiver that is available to help your parents, and more importantly, finding a caregiver that is right for your aging parent. With us are two local business owners who run agencies that hire and place caregivers at homes across Northern Virginia. They will share with us their insights and suggestions on how to find and hire caregivers to care for your loved one. Our first guest is the owner of a Griswold home care franchise in Alexandria, a business that provides home care services to seniors and adults with disabilities throughout the communities of Fairfax County, Alexandria, and Arlington. She's a member of the board of directors of the Jean Griswold Foundation called Rebuilding Together and the Rotary Club of Alexandria. Our second guest is the president and owner of Thrive at Home, a private company that provides private pay caregivers to customers in Northern Virginia. She has been in the industry since 1990 and is a member of the Virginia Association of Home Care and Hospice and the Private Care Association. Please welcome Christine Friedberg and Julie Black. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
You guys are involved in a very, very tough business. I mean, very, very challenging, and let's talk about this to begin with. What type of services are provided by caregivers, Christine?
Caregivers will provide two main categories of service. One is called activities of daily living, oftentimes referred to as ADLs. And then the other group is called IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living.
Okay, and then I guess there's a companionship component as well?
There is. Yeah, there's a companionship piece in terms of homemaking, which can include anything from taking someone to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, to getting hair done, and just really being with them and engaging with them and keeping them active in the community.
Well, let's talk about the personal care component. Julie, what is involved with that?
So the activities of daily living include bathing and dressing, eating, toileting, walking and transferring, lifting, assistance.
Okay, and then the homemaking portion, what does that involve?
Yeah, so it can be everything from buying groceries and cooking healthy meals, helping with laundry, changing sheets, doing light housekeeping, really helping somebody keep track of their home and making sure that they're getting all their needs met.
Sure, sure. Now, Julie, Christine mentioned a little bit, but talk a little bit more about companionship. What part of that function is covered by that?
Well, companionship would be involved with every case that the caregiver goes on, but just exclusively a companionship task is there's no hands-on care. It's transportation, grocery shopping, errands, cooking, light housekeeping.
Okay, okay. Christine, tell me what a caregiver does not do.
Caregiver, the big thing we run across is administering medications. the caregivers can help remind someone and prompt them that it's noon, it's time to take your afternoon pills, but they are not making the decisions in terms of how much medication should be given and actually giving it to their client. That's not something that they're trained on, and there are other providers that can help with that.
Okay, that's important for folks to understand that when they hire a caregiver, that because most of the people that they're going to be caring for are going to have medications.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so that has to be addressed in another way.
Yep, that's probably one of the top concerns that we hear is medication. And oftentimes what we'll recommend is that they get a pill box and have somebody set up that pill box for them. And pill boxes can come for 1 week or 2 weeks at a time, and they'll have different compartments. And so someone can come in and set up that pill box, and it's just the caregiver reminding them to go ahead and take the pill that's right there in that AM box or AM slot at that time of day.
And that's a very good idea. That's a good
What about
solution.
pharmacies that do the bubble packing? Some pharmacies, they bubble pack, so you just pop the bubble and there's the medication.
Yeah.
So that's another option.
So those
for
are good
people.
tools, but
Yeah.
it's important that the key thing to remember is that the caregivers do not do the medications.
Correct.
They can remind you.
Correct.
Let's talk a little bit about training and licensing. Julie, is there some sort of degree or training program for caregivers?
Yes, so the minimal, I would say the minimum training would be a certificate of training in home care, I guess it's called a home health aide, and they learn about the ADLs, and they're in the classroom training in addition to clinical hours that they work in the field.
Okay. Those
And then-
clinical hours can be very, very helpful.
Those are very critical. And then I guess the next step would be if the license, they can actually get licensed as a caregiver through the Department of Health as a certified nursing assistant.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that then. I guess Christine wants to expand on that a little bit. Besides getting the home health aid, which I think is kind of critical for anybody you place in the house, the next level is to go to the various licenses that might be out there they could get. Tell me a little bit more about that, expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah. So as Julie mentioned, kind of the highest level of certification for a caregiver is the Certified Nurse Aide, a CNA.
CNA.
And that is something that you can do with the state of Virginia. And the state of Virginia has a requirement for those that are doing hands-on personal care, those ADLs that we referred to earlier. It's required that they have a minimum level of certification. They want to make sure that caregivers that are going into these homes have been trained, as Julie had mentioned, hands-on, both in the class as well as in the classroom, to really be able to take care of these people's needs. So it's important to look for that certification.
I mean, you're at the most basic level, and they definitely need to. We're talking about dealing with the person and those personal needs. You definitely have to have some skill sets.
Absolutely.
And some of those have to be trained. Those are trained sets.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of the non-trainable things that come in, like the compassion and the empathy,
Sure.
that really to look for in a caregiver. But giving somebody a bed bath isn't something that we're all used to. It's something that does take a high level of skill.
Sure. Well, let's talk about finding and hiring a caregiver. Julie, when does the need for a caregiver service typically arise? When do you find that typically arises?
So typically it would come if someone has surgery, so it would be after surgery, they need some help, or if they're in a rehabilitation facility and it's time to come home and they might need some assistance for a little while. If a spouse is taking care of a loved one and it's getting to be a little difficult for them, this kind of gives them a little break.
They call that respite care?
Respite care. And just to keep someone independent at home, just say they need a little bit of care just to maintain that independence. If your loved one maybe is showing signs of dementia or is a fall risk, I would say those are the main reasons that we would come in to play.
Okay. So Christine, how does somebody find a caregiver?
Yeah. So oftentimes we're seeing, as with a lot of things that are happening now, people are looking online for a caregiver. They'll kind of start a number of months out before the care is actually needed, and they'll start looking online for the different services that are available. But oftentimes we'll see that someone will actually put the plan into action when there is some sort of an emergency that happens. As Julie had mentioned, if someone ends up having surgery, if they end up in the hospital, they will be looking for what a good plan is for when they come home. And so oftentimes they may have started the research online, but then they'll hear additional details from what are oftentimes the discharge planner or the social worker, either at the hospital, at the rehab facility they're in. A lot of primary care physicians are starting to kind of look at the whole being of their patients, and so they'll look at what resources would be helpful for them at that time. But kind of the typical amount of time someone is looking into home care is about 13 months, kind of gathering the information, but it's oftentimes a very quick pull of the trigger when there is an incident that happens.
Sure. Well, that's good to know. Julie, what are some of the key questions that I should be asking when I'm trying to find a caregiver, either asking the caregiver directly or if I'm going to hire an agency? Tell me what I should be, what are the things I should be asking?
Yeah, I mean, what's very important is, again, what's their training? What kind of experience do they have? That's something that is very important. Have they actually have the hands-on experience to go into a home and be able to do the tasks that are needed? What kind of background checks are the company, what are they doing to make sure this person is a safe person coming into your home?
Okay. And I guess the experience, as you mentioned, is a key thing. They've
Very
actually
important.
been doing this for a while. And as in your own agency, though, do you do a lot of that stuff? Is that one of the agencies? What the agencies do is they do a lot of that screening and so on to get people, the right kind of people hired?
Well, I would say I've been doing this for 30 years, and based on my experience, the most important part of home care is the caregivers that the company hires. And we spend a lot of time, I know Christine does also, spending time on their compassion and their empathy, but in addition, what kind of experience do they have, what kind of training do they have, and running more background checks than are actually required by the state. You get a better picture of the person if you run more checks than what they require.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think that's one of the, what we bring out here, the key thing is that's the difference from hiring someone that you don't know or you refer to versus hiring through an agency.
Right.
So, let's talk about caregiver costs, Christine. Let's just talk about what are we looking at? I mean, again, the difference between hiring someone directly who's a friend of someone who helps somebody else out, versus going to an agency, and are there hourly rates? Are there daily rates? Tell us a little bit about that, with the marketplaces got it coming out.
Yeah, so I would say typically when someone's hiring a caregiver, it's on an hourly basis. And if you're going to go through an agency, typically there are minimums that agencies look for a minimum of 4 hours of care at one given time.
Okay.
And the price for hourly is going to range, I would say, for a private caregiver anywhere from $15 to upwards of $30. Agencies probably start around $20 to $22 per hour.
So if you're hiring someone not through an agency, you might be paying $15 or more.
I would say 15 to 22, and then with an agency, probably closer to the $22 to $30 range per hour.
Okay.
And then there's a live-in option, which is where the caregiver is living in with somebody, acting as a roommate, but certainly somebody that's able to provide that hands-on care. And they are going to be working anywhere from 13 to 16 hours a day with getting 8 hours of sleep. And that's a great option for someone who doesn't have a great deal in terms, or they don't need a lot of hands-on care, but they just having somebody there at all times for peace of mind for them and for their family members. It's a great option, and I would say you probably see that range anywhere from $250 a day upwards to $300 to $350 a day.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So if someone hires a caregiver directly, do they have to worry about payroll taxes and tax reporting and employment filings?
They do. They do. They're considered an employee of your home. So in addition to the hourly rate, maybe it might be lower, but you have other costs. You have the payroll tax, you have unemployment taxes, you have workers' compensation, and those add up.
So that would explain the differential in cost, hourly rate between hiring someone directly versus hiring someone through an agency, because the agency's doing all that.
They're doing that. Plus the agency has a nurse that comes out, does an assessment, does a plan of care with the family, and oversees the care. So that's always reassuring to have that in place. Sure,
that makes lots of sense. Well, I want to talk to both of you about the, if I'm going to hire somebody through an agency, that's going to place somebody, some of the different terms and conditions that we see in the engagement process. So Christine, I'll start with you. Do people require retainers? Or agency require retainers?
Some do, others don't. So I would say it can range anywhere from no retainers upwards to $10,000 for a fee. When someone's having a lot of care, it can add up in terms of the expense. And so agencies want to make sure that their costs are covered because they're paying that caregiver for each hour that's worked.
Sure.
But it can really range, and that's an important question to ask, depending on how much care you're looking for.
Okay. How about written contracts, Julie?
We all have written contracts as required by the Department of Health. It's like a client agreement
Okay.
that sets the terms of the relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how about cancellations? I mean, you hire someone to come in for 4 hours. What's the cancellation policy people can expect to see?
Yep. So you're going to see a range here as well, anywhere from 2 hours cancellation, and others want 2 weeks of cancellation.
Oh my,
so
2 weeks.
They went 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. So it's really understanding what you're getting into, and if you're having care for the long term, then 2 weeks may be okay. But if it's more of short term, depending on the condition, then having something that's 2 weeks, 24 hours notice is probably more acceptable.
Sure, sure. And of course, the agency then takes on responsibility to pay all the taxes, so you're not having to worry about those filings.
Correct.
And we talked about the minimum number of hours that generally you're going to see, and that's because you've got to pay these people. And many of the caregivers that are actually providing the service generally rely on public transportation. I think you folks were telling us, so we have to be concerned about that as well.
I pretty much, we require that they have a car because it's very hard to get around Virginia without a vehicle going to people's homes. However, it's more the location where the caregivers live opposed to where the clients are. And the traffic in Virginia definitely poses a problem.
So let's talk a little bit about, Julie, about the benefits of using a service company versus hiring somebody directly. Caregiver gets sick that's been placed, in a home by you. What do you do?
So we have, can't think of the word right now. We have a group of caregivers that we have working with us. So if someone calls out sick, we have someone else that can go in to fill in the space.
So that's a big advantage.
It's a huge advantage.
Big advantage of having an agency. Let's talk about, let's say you place someone in a home and it's not a good match. How does that? Is it a benefit for an agency because they can bring somebody else in?
Absolutely. So if the client calls and says, I'm not happy, say, you know what, let's try someone else. It's a personality match. That's the hardest part.
Okay, that's important to know. And then, of course, as we talked, Christine, the agency handles all the screening and makes sure that they're up to speed and meets their standards before they place somebody in the home.
Yep,
so that's important.
And oftentimes the agencies will also do ongoing training, just so that they stay on top of all of their skills. There's new information that comes out. I think especially on the companionship side in terms of how to engage people in their home and activities to do with them. There's a lot of new information that's coming out these days. It's important for the caregivers to learn.
Sure, there's techniques about how you approach people and deal with certain situations, of course. Christine, I wanted to ask you though, does long-term care cover the caregiver costs for this home service?
It does. It does.
That's important for people to know that.
It is, because otherwise home care is private pay. And so long-term care insurance, I would say we see about 10% of the population that has long-term care insurance to pay for it.
Only 10%.
Each policy is a little bit different in terms of how much they'll cover. Whether it be per day or throughout a lifetime. There's oftentimes an elimination period as well that says how long you have to have care before they'll start paying for it. And oftentimes you'll as well have to either need help with 3 to 4 of the ADLs that we mentioned earlier, the activities of daily living. And so they're looking for those things before they'll start paying out of the long-term care insurance.
Right, that can be a barrier. You may only have 1 or 2 issues as opposed to 3 or 4.
Yep, but it's definitely worth making the claim and looking into it because that can be a great resource to allow you to have the care.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn to some common problems and pitfalls that you folks have seen over the many years you guys have been doing this. So, Julia, let's start with you. What are some of the common problems that you would want to point out to folks or pitfalls?
Well, I would say the most difficult part is the resistance factor that comes into play for someone because their independence is being threatened. They don't want a stranger coming into their home. That's really a difficult thing to overcome.
Okay. Anything else besides that?
Sure.
What else?
I would say the caregivers being from other countries, sometimes there's a cultural issue or maybe a language, there's an accent that might be difficult for the person to understand.
Okay. Yeah, we've noticed that a lot of people can have some thick accents, and I know you had mentioned that people may have if they're hard of hearing, may not be able to understand them as well. So that's the case where getting the right match may actually need to be where an adjustment might be appropriate.
Absolutely, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, how about yourself? Anything else you want to add as far as common problem pitfalls you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Julie commented earlier about that if it's not a right personality fit, to be okay with making that change. I think some people feel bad. They think the caregivers plenty nice and skilled, but it is, you're having somebody into your house, you want it to be a good fit in terms of personality, and so you really want to make sure that people are speaking up and letting it be known if it's not a good fit, so that you can make a change so it's a good long-term solution for people, because as Julie mentioned, people are resistant to having care already, and if you put somebody in there that's not a good fit, they're going to be even more resistant.
Oh, absolutely. What about the problems we're seeing about not having enough caregivers that go around? Is that a problem you guys are seeing too?
Yeah.
There's enough caregivers. The question is there enough good caregivers? And I would say that it's getting more difficult. It's very challenging.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of changes in terms of regulations in the home care industry over the past couple of years that have really hindered the number of hours that caregivers can work. So a lot of the caregivers that work at one agency are working at another agency, also working at a hospital, and so they're really pulled into a bunch of different directions. And so, you know, it's important for us to keep promoting this profession and how important it is, because the aging population is just increasing, and we're going to need more of people in this profession. And so really kind of lifting it up and letting people know what an amazing profession this is and what a difference they're making, but also making sure that there's not too many regulations put on it that are really hurting the caregivers and the work they can do as well as their clients.
Sure, I know the regulation. I remember that a couple of years ago they changed some of those rules as far as overtime.
Yeah.
That has been quite an impact. How about expectations? Okay, how do you? Is that an issue that needs to be managed, and is that a problem you run into, Julie?
Well, we try when the nurse goes out to open up the case. These are the types of issues that are discussed. You know, what's your expectation? The problem is the adult child might expect the loved one to be able to do certain things that they really aren't able to do. That's what I would say would be a problem.
Okay.
They want they want their mother to walk, but yet it's not safe for them to walk, and so that's difficult when that happens.
Is another problem that the children may expect the caregiver to do more than they're really able to do, or they're supposed to do?
I don't know about able, like they want them to wash the windows and maybe scrub the floor like what a maid would do, and the caregivers, they're professionals and they look at themselves as caregivers and they don't mind doing light housekeeping, but I think that part of it they don't like.
So that's something that has to be discussed to make sure you understand that
Right.
there's things we do and there's things we don't do.
Right.
Yep.
So.
And I think oftentimes too, when a family sees that a caregiver is very capable, they'll pile more and more on them. You know, as we discussed earlier, there's the problems with administering medications. Sometimes that will come up. You know, caregivers should not be involved in finances. There are professionals that focus on that, and we try to keep the caregivers very separate from those things. But you know, the family will oftentimes, you know, try to, because the person is loving and they want to take care of their parent, but there has to be boundaries to keep everybody safe in the situation.
Sure. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff. You know, there's a lot of great information so far. How about if we just take a minute or two for each of you to kind of share some final thoughts and suggestions about things you want to really, you know, bring people's attention to from all that we've talked about today. So, Julie, how about you first?
Well, what I did was, instead of me talking, is I'll just mention too, I wrote down some comments that our clients have mentioned to the caregivers, and they're very brief. One says, "Our caregiver was a godsend. Her compassion, attentiveness, devotion, and professionalism allowed my mother to have 5 additional years of good quality life after her hospitalization. Her care for my mother allowed me to continue working and have a considerable amount of independence as well." That came from an adult daughter.
So that's an example of where the caregiver can make a real difference.
It makes a huge difference, exactly. And the last one, I'll say, "Because I live alone and family not close by, my surgeon said I need to have around-the-clock care for the first few days of my return home from the hospital. The caregivers were great. I'm amazed I thought I could take care of myself, as I quickly learned I needed help with even the simplest of tasks, such as getting in and out of bed. Having caregivers allowed me to relax and get plenty of needed rest."
Okay, so that's the case.
Those would be my comments.
So that's an example of where the caregiver can make a real difference and where they fit into the solution as far as someone's, you know, recovery,
Right.
the case may be,
Absolutely.
or otherwise with their ongoing life. Christine, how about yourself?
Yeah, so those situations, you know, are talking about a lot of the needs that come where there are very acute needs, where somebody ends up in the emergency room or with surgery and needs help. But I like to remind people that home care can be a good long-term solution. I think, it's over 90% of adults that want to stay and age in place in home.
Very
and
important.
It's less than 40% of them that have the opportunity to do that because they don't know what resources are available. They don't understand home care is available. And they don't look at it as an option early enough in the scheme of things until they are in a situation where they're just having to put whatever they can into place quickly, and so they have less choice. And so my suggestion is for people to always look into the options, whether it be home care or moving into retirement community earlier on into the puzzle, and so you have more choice as to what you want to do.
Those are good suggestions. Well, ladies, I want to thank you both for taking the time and come and talk with us today and sharing this great information and for this great public service you've done. You're providing to the folks across Northern Virginia who are going to be investigating home care for their parents in the years to come.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
It was a
coming.
pleasure.
It's our pleasure. With the aging of our population, more and more seniors need assistance in making lifestyle and medical decisions. One of the most common requests from the elderly is that they be allowed to live in their home as long as possible. Our show this evening illustrates for us how a caregiver can help a guardian or a family member care for a loved one, meet their request to live in their home they know and love, and allow them to live as fulfilling, safe, and rich a life as possible during their senior years. While many folks may try to hire a caregiver privately, as the discussion with our guest illustrates, there is much to consider and investigate before you make that hiring decision. Using a placement agency in the business of finding caring people who are and can be trained to be qualified caregivers is a good solution for many folks seeking the assistance of a caregiver to give their elderly loved one the care they need. This brings us to the conclusion of our show on caregivers. Hope you found it informative, and remember that replays of the show can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.